Right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 8 of our collective COVID experience. I'm not going to bother introducing myself because I think if you don't know me by now, you haven't been paying attention, and doing it again isn't going to work. So we have an interesting event for you today because we're going to do the first half of the webinar sort of the same way we have in the past. The second half of the webinar, what we're going to do is an open panel discussion with respect to municipal issues about reopening. And so we're going to try to give you our thoughts on a number of areas, and we would certainly invite questions on those areas with respect to the reopening issues that we're going to talk about. So what we're going to start with is a legislative update from Tim. Then I'm going to talk to you about some more strategies for dealing with irate payers. Nuala is going to talk about some crowd psychology and fear of reopening issues that municipalities will need to deal with. And then we'll get to our panel discussion about reopening issues. So I see that we've just got a couple more people coming in. And what I would like to do is turn this over to Tim for the legislative update about what happened from the province this week. So Tim, can you take care of that for us?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone once again for joining us. We really appreciate it. As you know, there was not a huge amount of news this week. Things are starting to reopen, which is great. But we still need to take care to remember that the declared emergency is still in place until June 2nd, and the emergency orders themselves are going to remain until May 29th. That means certain businesses such as bars and restaurants are still to remain closed. They can operate for delivery and takeout. Of course, unfortunately, for some of us, the social gathering guidelines are still in place. So still no more than 5 people at a social gathering. One of the things that the Premier has said, and it's something that we were talking about earlier, all of us, was just the fact that we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel now, which is great. But the reality is that, and we've seen it, I think there's been some other jurisdictions that have had this happen, is that we need to remember that the virus is still there. It's possible for us to backslide and have more cases come up, and I believe the Premier has said that if that happens, we're going to go right back to sort of square one, let's say, as far as closures are concerned. And so it's still very important. I know everybody's anxious to get out and do things, but it's so important to continue to take safety precautions, continue to social distance, continue, if you have a mask, to wear that, and be cognizant of the fact that just because things are opening, people are getting out more, that of course we're not out of the woods yet. And it's really, really important to continue to be vigilant with your own safety. So that's essentially the update for this week. Not a lengthy update, but I think an important one from the perspective of remembering that we've got to remain safe and take care of ourselves still. So we're not out of the woods yet.
Thanks, Tim. So on that point, I think that that is a really good message for councils to be sending out in their communication with ratepayers about their reopening plan. So I'm going to now talk about other ideas for dealing with ratepayers, irate payers as I've called them, if the first 6 ideas that I gave you last week don't work. And so one of the first that I'll talk about today is similar to the first rule that I gave you last week, which was that council needs to know that there will be backlash and criticism for every single decision that you make. And so the first strategy is essentially a stay the course strategy. So particularly where you've, as a council, decided in your strategic and policy decision-making process that you're going to do something in specific, you're going to implement a program, you're going to make a big change. The first technique is to simply stay the course. You know there's going to be a bunch of ratepayers or interest groups or whatever against you, but make the decision going in when you've made the decision to implement this program. We're going to stay the course. So it does require sort of strong fortitude on council's part, and many leaders get themselves into trouble when they make a decision and then waffle on it afterward. And so it's if this is a strategy that council wants to use, it's important to talk about it in your council meetings when the decision is being made at the outset. So we know people are not going to like this decision to put in a quarry. We know that there's going to be opposition, and it might involve appeals to the Ontario, the land, the LPAT. But we're going ahead with it. We have done our due diligence. We are supporting this as a project for our community, and we're going ahead. So essentially, stay the course, ride it out. Be prepared at the outset for a long journey. Emotional discussions and fear are kind of your enemy in this process. You need to try to keep emotion out and stick to the rational, considered reasons that council made the decision in the first place. And then when you're using this strategy, don't get involved in every single dispute about it. Don't respond to every ratepayer who says, I don't want a quarry, or I'm going to appeal, or it's not fair, or whatever. Pick the challenges that you're going to take, and then discuss them in council and make a reasoned response. It's useful when you're going to employ this strategy to actually have sort of a decision tree chart that council can refer to. So what I mean by that is a timeline about what council did as they were going through the analysis process, so that when you're getting pushback and you're questioning whether what you did is the right decision, you can look back and you can say, no, we did planning, we did community engagement, we had 8 different meetings, we got advice from an environmental professional, we got advice from legal. And if you've got that in front of you on a chart so you can see the decision-making process, it's a lot easier to stick to your decision. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2, it builds off of that, and it is basically you sit back as council or councillors and watch the debate, and you only wade in to the debate when you have to. So like I said at the beginning, there will be people who are speaking out on social media against every single decision that you make. If you raise taxes, they will speak out against that. If you lower taxes, they will speak out against that, guaranteed. So don't worry about engaging in every single debate. Watch the discussion and only wade in when it's appropriate. So if you've got 5 or 6 people who are speaking nasty on social media, let them, because as they build their thread, they're going to look like nasty people who are who are not speaking rationally. And so you can often, by giving them their own rope, let them destroy their own credibility. You don't have to get involved. One suggestion that I read was you wait till about negative post 15 before you wade in, and then you have one counselor or staff person designated who's really good at social media to deliver a message to say, okay, well, you know, we've seen all this. In fact, I would refer you to the minutes of whatever where we had the public meeting, and we had 20 people come out and everybody voiced support. So you can be specific and strategic about the issues that you deal with. And the other issue, and this one I find is very effective if done well, it has to be done somewhat in secret, so don't tell anybody I told you this. It's a bit like parenting, and it's change the message. So when the kids are crying about the fact that the quarry is going in, don't address that issue at all. Instead, talk about some other awesome project that the municipality is working on. Congratulate or roads crew on snowfall or something like that. You just completely divert to a totally different topic that's extremely successful for the municipality. It's just like parenting when your kids want the chocolate bar at the grocery store checkout. If you address that, you're going to get in a fight. If you put them to work bagging the groceries and putting it in the cart, you divert their attention. So changing the message is the third strategy that I would suggest. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start a poll that we've got, and if you can answer these questions, they're going to lead into Nuala's discussion, and Nuala's going to talk about concerns of crowds. What did you call it, Nuala? Crowd psychology. So I'll launch the poll now, and then I'll hand this over to Nuala to talk about crowd psychology. Nuala, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Okay, and is that better?
That's much better.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Again, just delighted that so many of you can join us. Really reassures us that everybody's feeling healthy and safe, at least healthy and safe enough to participate in our webinar. And again, we're very cognizant of how valuable your time is, particularly now. There's a huge body of educational videos that you could select, and we're really honored that you pick ours week after week. Really gives us a boost during this very unsettling time. So as Paul was saying, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about fear of going in public, fear of crowds, and what really they're calling now the pandemic of fear, which experts are saying spreads much faster than the virus proper. So if you've had an opportunity to look online or even on television, you're seeing some very haunting videos of places like, I was looking at St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, and it's just empty. There's some really eerie drone footage of Las Vegas, which is just always an active, very, very busy populated area. And it's also empty. And all of the great world landmarks, the Eiffel Tower and the Grand Canal in Venice, they're vacant. So we're getting, when you first see those images, it's shocking and alarming. And we're actually getting to a point where we're kind of almost comfortable with it, because we're seeing these great places where people would normally congregate are being left empty. The idea of fear contagion, how are we going to get crowds back, is something that's becoming a bigger issue for industry that relies on crowds for its revenue. So largely you're seeing that with big sporting events, where NHL is saying they're not sure what the future looks like. The Tokyo Olympics have been postponed. So we're learning from the action of others that there's something to be fearful of. And indeed, there is something to be fearful of. We've never in most of our lifetimes have seen anything like this, where it's a global pandemic. There is some hope. I was reading they've made some advance in Connecticut with antibodies, which I think would work a ways at a vaccine. Of course, it's a ways down the road, but we are seeing reason for hope, and we're also seeing reason for hope with the reopening. Of course, it's going to be a question of balance. So as a municipality, when you're running something like an arena, where you're going to have sporting events, or a small venue for community theater, or you're going to have skating, or conferences, or concerts, how are you going to get the public to not just return to your facility, but to return with confidence? So I have a couple of tips to help with that. And I would say of all the topics I have discussed on these Friday webinars, this one for me is the one that is going to be the most malleable. It's going to change over the course of time, and as we learn more and as crowds start coming back, we will learn more. So this is the first building block, I'm going to say, but I expect I'll be coming back to this topic with more advice. So before you bring the public back in, when you bring your staff back in, as we've said over and over again, you want to do so safely. That means do not come if you're sick. That means if you're exhibiting signs, you need to check and see if you need to meet the criteria on Health Ontario with their little self-monitoring test to see if you need to go to a COVID assessment center. It means if you've traveled, you need to self-quarantine. If you've been in contact with someone who's positive, you need to self-quarantine. You need to have the proper PPE, social distancing, hand washing, proper hand washing. All of that has to be in place for your staff. When you have that in place and you're starting to open it up to the public, we spoke earlier about some things that you could introduce in terms of maybe not utilizing every seat in the facility, making sure that there's that space between individuals, putting markers on the floor. If people are waiting at a canteen, for example, that we maintain the social distancing in those areas. So first and foremost, make the site physically safe with sanitization, with limiting the numbers that are coming in, and with maintaining the distance. Second, I would say is be a trusted source of information. So when you as the municipality are providing information, make sure that it is balanced, accurate, and you've given it some time. How many times have we spread a story or followed something and it's not quite accurate with the passage of 24 hours? So make sure that when you're disseminating information, your source is a trusted, reliable source. And right now with the pandemic, those are our local health, public health agencies. That's really the guiding force for the pandemic. Of course, with the World Health Organization and CDC, but your local
So for me, Nuala has frozen. And for everybody else. Okay, so Nuala did the work on that one, so I can't really take over for it. I presume she will rejoin us. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move us on to the panel discussion. And how we're going to do that is I'm going to just list the topics that we want to discuss, and then we'll start at the top. And for my team, when you have an issue that you want to comment on, give me a signal, and then we'll turn it over to you, because I think if we all talk at the same time, we're going to cut everybody off. And then for anybody who in the gallery has a question or an idea or a comment, put it in chat, and we're happy to let you come on and discuss that as well. So the questions that we've got, and this is with respect to reopening or points for discussion, is number one, whose role is it anyway? Number 2, the issue of level of service. Number 3, the province says we can reopen our insert parks, marinas, golf courses. Number 4, signage and restricting access. Number 5, budgetary issues. Number 6, sanitization. Number 7, risk. Number 8 is insurance. Number 9 is something that you've probably heard me talk about, which is speed of decisions. Number 10 is report to council about reopening. Number 11 is the policy framework that needs to be in place before reopening. And the last question, which might be the most important one, is should we be first? So we're going to talk about whose role is it anyway? And the issue here we've talked about during the process of closing, that it's council's decision, or should be council's decision, about closing municipal facilities. And my opinion with respect to reopening is the same. When we're considering reopening, we see this as a policy decision for the municipality. And I would strongly urge you to take that up at council, at an open council meeting, so that there is a transparent debate on what the issues are that council is thinking of when deciding to open various municipal facilities as they're permitted to be reopened. So this issue came to me a couple of times from different municipalities this week, where either senior staff or council said, gee, you know, I just happened to go by the boat launch and the signs that closed it are gone. But we didn't deal with that in council. Or senior staff even saying, holy smokes, I see people out on the municipal golf course, but it was kind of the golf course staff that decided on their own to reopen the golf course. And so my strong recommendation is that before the municipality reopens any facilities, that you have that dealt with in a council meeting. Did Nuala come back on, Britt? Nuala, we're into the panel discussion. And I wondered, we were talking about whose role it is anyway, and I wondered if you want to finish up your crowd fear presentation, or do you want to leave that for the end? And we can't hear you. You're muted.
Thanks. Better?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that, people. Just a little technical boo-boo on my end. So I was saying, in terms of best practices for reopening, particularly your facilities that are going to be crowd specific. So arenas, swimming pools, skating rinks, that sort of thing. And it's important. It's an important source of revenue for municipalities, but it's more important than that. It's great for quality of life in every community that these reopen, and that we have a sense of joy and recreation again. So it's an important thing. So I was saying, make sure that when you're communicating with your community, that your information is accurate. Go to a reliable source and double check your homework before you make an announcement on it. So in hand in glove with that is be in regular and constant contact with your local health unit. Find someone there that is a good source that will tell you how things are unfolding, what you need to be concerned about, and you can run best practices by them to say, we're thinking about reopening the arena, but we're going to look at it at half capacity. What do you think of that? Or do you think it should be less? And engage them in the debate. They're the experts. Another point is use your virtual resources during this time period. That allows people to stay current. So for example, if you've got a local sport hero, now is a great time to celebrate that person so that they're not forgotten. So when the hockey season starts again and we're looking at bringing audiences back to watch, they haven't forgotten who the players are. And similarly, you can use it to provide a little hero platform for some of your own staff heroes. So the person who's cleaning that arena so that it's ready for everyone to come back, the security guards that are minding how many people enter the facilities, it's a great time to celebrate them on your website. And as I said in an earlier session, it means so very much to staff to hear, particularly from some of senior administration or the politicians, good job. I noticed that. I noticed that you really took a lot of pride in making sure that the seats were clean or that the handrail was wiped down. I noticed that it keeps all of us healthy, and that is called integrity. So it's definitely worth celebrating. The notion that we're in this together isn't just lip service. We literally are. If groups choose not to follow the recommendations of the health unit, CDC, WHO, we can be in a lot of trouble, and not to overly dramatize it, but it can be fatal trouble. So we really are in this together. So within that vein, reach out to the people that make most use of your arena, of your swimming pool, of your gymnasium. Write to those groups. Set up a Zoom meeting with them to say, we're looking at reopening, we're looking at staggering it, what's your biggest concern? What is your membership saying? How can we do this together so that we are all very, very safe when we start to reopen? And it's, again, that balance of, you want the quality of life, you want an injection of joy in your community again, but it's got to be done safely. So really engage the user groups. And then finally, tailor your response. Every situation is different. And I think I said earlier that when you look at the CDC guide for reopening, and it actually even delists categories of places and how they might reopen. So when I first saw that, I thought, well, fantastic, that'll be a great resource. It's not. It's an incredibly skeletal resource. And I think I know why. Because the CDC is saying, tailor it. Generally, you need to do this, this, and this, but I don't know. I don't know what kind of acts you get. I don't know what kind of events you get. I don't know what the room capacity is. So all of that has to be factored in, and it does fall. And I mean, that's got to be an old chorus for municipalities, where you think that the province or the federal government is going to give us really strong direction, and in fact, they don't give strong direction. They give very generalized direction, and when it comes down to the nuts and bolts, it does fall to municipalities to actually execute, and that's where you're going to be. So I really hope that you're starting to think about reopening and the psychological component of it, because if people are scared to take cruises and to visit the Eiffel Tower, and then they're certainly going to be scared to come to your hockey game or your gymnastics tournament. And we need to start reinstilling a little bit of calm and a reasonableness, so that the end is in sight. We still have to be very, very careful. But, and also I would say that too, if you implement something to reopen and it's not working, you get a little spike in your community, or you see there is the fear is starting to froth up again, then sit down, take another look at it. Premier Ford said basically the same thing the other day, that if we're opening too quickly, we'll shut it down again. Municipalities can do the exact same thing. So I hope that this is just the beginning cornerstone of what we're going to do in terms of reopening. I hope to have more information for you as this continues to unfold. But for today, those are the preliminary tips I have for you, at any rate, for reopening. And I do wish you all the very, very best of luck in your reopening.
So Nuala, I have just shared the poll results from the questions for your presentation. So it looks like 80% thereabouts are absolutely not or very unlikely to attend a sporting event is the response right now on sporting events. With only one person saying they're definitely going to attend. And then when we get to traveling, it's a little broader. It looks like 17% say they will not travel again. Another 20% say it's unlikely, and 50% on top of that, say it's somewhat likely. So again, the vast majority are very reluctant to travel, and I just wonder if you have any observations with respect to that.
Yeah. This is the audience that we have today are people that are running these facilities, and they're saying, I'm very unlikely to return. So imagine your community. The people that are here today know the safeguards that you're putting in place, know the precautions that you're taking, and you're scared. So imagine how your community is. And it's going to be a gradual, it's going to be a staggered, graduated reopening. And that's what we're hearing over and over and over again. You can make a mistake by going too fast, but you really can't make a mistake by going too slow. And Paul had, the team, all of us at WMG have been working hard on what we think will really help with the reopening. I think Paul's going to talk about it. I don't know if you want to introduce it now, Paul, or at the end. Like, I think people might want to hear what you're cooking up.
Well, no, I'm going to hand it back to you, Nuala. This is we're looking at developing, or we have developed, and we're looking at presenting a safety certification for municipalities here with council and staff to say that they're safety certified with respect to their responsibilities around reopening in COVID. So we've set it up with so far 6 different modules for staff to take, and you'll end up at the end of it with a certification indicating that your staff have been safety certified with respect to coming back. We're working in conjunction with some industry experts, and so that's going to be rolling out probably in June. And so, Nuala, I'll hand that back to you because I know that you're heavily involved with that.
Yeah, we're very concerned about, as you can tell, because it's often the flavor of many of our presentations. We're very concerned about the psychological aspect of the reopening. I'm not in any means saying that you're glossing over your obligations to keep the workplace safe, to ensure that all the safety precautions are in place for guests when we have visitors to any of our facilities. I'm not saying, it's just a psychological anomaly that people are scared and they have nothing to be scared of. There is something to be fearful of, but we're trying to keep it in the reasonably contained. So one of the things that we have thought of as a group, and how can we best serve our municipal clients, is this safety training, and it's COVID safety certification training, which gives basically an understanding of what the virus is, how it's spread, what you can do to contain it. We look at the unique workplaces. So if you have a gym, your obligations are going to be different than a municipality that just has a little town hall and it's just office space. So how do you actually ensure that those places are safe? There's quizzes after each module. You can't go on to the next module until you've completed the quiz. You need to pass to get the certification. I think it really will do an awful lot for your community confidence to know that you and your staff took it very, very seriously. It will give you as senior administrators a sense of confidence that people who may not regularly be part of the corporate decision-making mindset, people that are cleaning buses, people that are mowing lawns in your parks, they still need to know how to act safely and with due precaution in the wake of the COVID virus. And you won't have any concern that an employee said, "Oh, I didn't know we were supposed to mask. I didn't know how to wear a mask. I didn't know." Another module was just on PPE. What PPE is needed for different areas of work within a municipality, how to properly use the PPE.
I think she's too close to the bridge abutment and it's interfering with her internet. So we'll go back to the panel discussion. And I wonder if anybody else on the team has thoughts or comments, or anybody from the audience, about the idea of whose role it is to develop the reopening protocol and policy. No questions. Okay. So the next point that I wanted to discuss on this issue is the idea of level of service. And this is really why I say that it is council's role to develop the reopening plan. And this should be actually a written policy document that council looks at to say, here's how we are going to roll out reopening our municipality, just like the province is doing with their plan. They've got a structured, documented phase 1, phase 2, all the way to phase 4. And so I think that because you have closed various of the municipal facilities and services, and you're now looking at reopening it, you're again changing the level of service. And so it's appropriate to look at a policy document to say how you're going to reopen, and that should incorporate amendments to your level of service bylaw, or even temporary amendments to your level of service bylaw as you're going forward. Anybody got comments or thoughts on that? Okay, well, Nuala, we are just discussing, and you're muted, whose role it is and the relationship of that to the level of service in municipalities. So nobody else has commented, so I'm handing it off to you.
That teaches me for having such a poor Zoom connection. The whose job is it? Our answer is always going to be the same. It's been the same since the outset. Make it council's job. Engage city council when you're making any decision about reopening, level of service, precautions that you're taking. It's good for a number of reasons to engage city council. First of all, these are very challenging, unsettling times. Don't presume to know the best way to do things. What we have found over and over and over again, particularly during this pandemic crisis, is that more heads really help bring different ideas to the table. Second, selfishly, it's a liability concern for you as an administrator, as a senior municipal staff person. You don't want to bear the brunt of this, because we're all saying that one of the upswings of this pandemic has been that people have come together and we're so concerned about one another, and people are just touching base with one another electronically or whatever, making sure people, neighbors and so forth, are okay. But I think we all know the honeymoon is going to end. And when it does, it will get very, I think, litigious. And people will be looking at, Paul was saying earlier to the WMG team that we really got to focus on return to work and what that's going to look like. We touched on it in an earlier seminar, but he really wants to dive pretty deeply into that, because you're going to have people saying, I have a disability. It's called COVID anxiety, and I can't come back to work. You need to accommodate me. So we really do want to look at all of those sessions, but it should come from council, so that if you say to a staff person, you need to come back and here's the precautions we can take, and they say, I got sick, or I got sicker, or my mental anxiety really went through the roof because of you, you want to be able to say, it wasn't because of me. It was a council decision. It was a group decision, and it also protects council. And then the final reason why it's very important is because city council is the best, cheapest form of media and communication. You have regular meetings, you have websites, your meetings are open to the public, and however you're managing that with electronic meetings, but it is a great place to get messaging across. And the messaging you want to get across to your community is, here's what we've done, here's what we're doing, here's what the level of service is like. We listen to you, we listen to the community, and this is where we're at. And I think that's why you're seeing things like golf courses and marinas and so forth reopening, because you can't keep particularly Northern Ontarians inside when the weather gets warm. You're just not going to be able to do it. So we have to respond, but you want to link arms with your council, and you want them to use that as a platform to reassure your community that you are in constant contact with your public health unit and you're doing all the right things. And if you're not doing the right thing, you'll switch it. You're going to constantly monitor it. So my answer to that question is, whose responsibility is? It's all of our responsibility. And the way you can show that is by bringing these issues to open council meetings.
Okay, so the next, oh, sorry, Mayor Othmer has put his hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. George Othmer, Town of Cobalt, Mayor of the Town of Cobalt, actually. I understand what you're saying, but we've been told countless times over and over again to do basic necessities, nothing else more than that. Now, I'm going to refer back to the MNR lifting of the fire last Friday, which we got the announcement somewhere around 4 o'clock. Apparently it was on Facebook at 12, which I really don't understand. Now, we have a small office. We've been closed for 6 weeks. It's unmanned. Now, how do we react to something like that? You're saying involve council. Well, it's a long weekend. It's Friday. People want burning permits. You know, we can't issue them. Our fire chief is a volunteer who's actually an essential service, so he's also working. So where do we go from there? We're told not to do anything that's unnecessary, yet now we have to react to this stuff and we have to do something about it, because if we don't allow people to have burning permits, they're going to burn illegally, which of course is involving our fire department and putting more people at risk.
Okay, so who on the team wants to touch that? I am itching to a little bit, but anybody else want to say anything first? Okay, because I have the power, I'm going to say it first. Your Worship, I agree with you 100% that the way that the fire ban got lifted was extremely problematic. And frankly, it's a perfect example of why quick decisions are a problem. And this does lead into the next topic that I want to talk about, being, the province says we can reopen our whatever. What do we do? And this is the same point. So just because the MNR lifted the fire ban doesn't mean that your fire department has to permit burning. Now, yes, this was thrown in your lap on a Friday afternoon, and I would suggest that that probably would warrant an emergency meeting of council. So that council can say, yeah, great, the ministry said that we could, but they didn't talk to us about that. We're not set up to issue fire permits. We're not set up to respond to the increase in fires that are going to be happening as a result of this. And so for Cobalt, we're going to leave the fire ban in place until we have a system set up. And that's really the answer that I have to the next question about the province saying you can open your parks, marinas, and golf courses. Just because the province says you may do something doesn't mean you must. And again, because this is I say this is really a government decision, meaning a council decision for our community, that council needs an opportunity to consider and respond to this. So if I know we've already passed through the long weekend, and I think it's the most disappointing decision that I've seen the provincial administration give during the COVID crisis, because frankly, I've been quite pleased with generally the way things have been going and the communication. And I think that this one slipped through the cracks, and there will be others. But I think it's not too late for a municipality whose fire chief is freaking out now saying, oh my God, we don't have permits in place. We don't have the personnel to do inspections, to say, go ahead, we're going to leave the fire ban in place until you have a burning permit. I might have said building permit, a burning permit, and you can institute that now if you haven't yet. So just because the province has lifted it doesn't mean you have to.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Your Worship?
We basically did exactly as you said, because we were having a council meeting on Tuesday night, so we were going to address the issue then. because of course, being a small town, long weekends, the fishing and, people are hard to get a hold of. But that's exactly what we did. We did leave the fire ban on for the weekend. It frustrated some people. We did get a couple of fire calls, I believe, but I mean, so be it. That was the only choice we had actually in the matter. So it would be nice if the province would give us lead time before making these announcements. That's what I'm trying to get at, I guess, basically.
And I agree with you very much, Your Worship. And frankly, I think that wouldn't be a bad idea for you on behalf of council to write a letter to your MPP and say, hey, we got caught on this one, and we want to make sure that we're involved in the next issues that are going to be thrust upon us. Give us a heads up so that we can work with you. The good thing is that with respect to things like marinas and boat launches and golf courses, what they're doing is they're saying you may reopen, which is totally different than the fire ban, because they lifted the fire ban and now you're stuck. So in most of the next decisions that you're going to see, you're going to have the ability to say, okay, great, we can now do this, and here is the plan we're putting forward to council about how we're going to stage it. Anybody else want to comment on that? Throw their hand up with the reactions icon.
Well, thank you very much. Much appreciated, and your webinars are fantastic, by the way, very informative.
Thank you very, very much, Your Worship. I really do appreciate that. So I want to move on, and I'm going to force Tim to talk about this one, about reopening parks, marinas, and golf courses. We know that they're being permitted to reopen, and there are restrictions with respect to golf courses, as an example. The course itself can be open. The clubhouse is not allowed to be reopened except for the purposes of washroom facilities. And this is another question that I've got from the gallery dealing with washroom facilities. So again, my thought is that while the province says you can reopen these things, it doesn't mean you must reopen them, and you don't have to reopen all of them. And so one of the issues that I've heard from municipalities is that we don't have the staff to clean all of the washrooms on a regular enough basis for us to be comfortable that we're minimizing risk to an acceptable level. So the easy answer to that is don't open them all. Open one, open two, and have a smaller contingent of staff involved in cleaning those on a regular basis. And so, Tim, I'm going to get you to talk about your thoughts on kind of a staged reopening of those facilities. And you're unmuted.
Yeah, so, I'm unmuted. Can't talk. Unmuted now. Great. So yeah, with golf courses, I mean, Paul explained. Of course, they can reopen. Your clubhouse can reopen for washroom facilities, for a restaurant, but the restaurant can only open for takeout, for delivery, and of course, if you have a pro shop or something to that effect, there's likely that's not going to be opening either. In terms of marinas, I mean, we're seeing now that marinas can reopen for recreational purposes, which is great. I believe that the same restrictions apply to marinas in the sense that if there's a public area, it's only available to the public for washroom use. I'd like to double check that, but I believe that's the case still. And in terms of reopening any facility, I think what Paul is saying is really good in the sense that you really don't. There's a tendency to want to just, as Paul said, it can open, so we should open it, and obviously the public is going to expect that there's going to be public pressure always. Everybody's kind of, I think I speak for myself maybe, but now that the restrictions are lifting, it's nice outside, people want to go, and there's going to be public pressure to get these open, but there's going to be public backlash if they open too quickly and the required cleaning isn't done, somebody gets sick. Certainly there's going to be more backlash, so there is public pressure to open them. And so I think, as Paul said, you don't have to open them. Just because they can open doesn't mean you have to open them. I understand the public is going to want those facilities open, but they're going to want to be safe a lot more. And so I would suggest, if you don't have the resources to do regular cleaning, to put social distancing measures in place, to have plexiglass where it's necessary or recommended, then wait till you do have those things in place. Make sure everybody's safe. Make sure your staff's safe, and I think the public ultimately will respect that decision.
Thanks, Tim. So the next point that we want to discuss along the lines of reopening is the issue of signage and restricting areas. Because, for example, in parks, your park is allowed to reopen, but the play structures are not. I know that Nuala personally has been involved in these issues in her past life, and so I'm going to turn this over to Nuala to look at that signage issue. And there we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I was involved with it in the major park in Sault Ste. Marie, and I'm going to tell you a story that I think is very applicable to what we're discussing right now. We have a major park in the center of the city. It's a beautiful park. It's on the water. It's got gorgeous play structures, and one of the local Rotary groups made a donation to the city. So there's a great number, not all of them, but a great number of the play structures now are completely accessible for kids that have mobility issues, and there's even a sensory area for kids that with autism. It's just beautiful. It's an absolutely lovely park. And for forever, in the center of the park, there was a train engine, and it's painted, and it's a very much played upon structure, but it is in fact a train. It is a big metal train that was donated by Algoma Central Rail to the city. There's a plaque on it, and the train itself has a big smiley face painted on it, so kids love it. When our insurers came, as they do, to check the facilities and see what coverage you need, they were shocked to see that we had an actual train as a play structure for the children in Sault Ste. Marie, and told us that that was a liability waiting to happen. And we asked them what we should do. And this is more sort of the essence of what I wanted to share with you. They said, well, don't post a sign, because it's a park and it's a play structure that children have been using. And case law supports the idea that when your target audience is children or youth, they generally do not read signs. You need some, either because they're too young and they don't know how to read, or they're too young and they don't care. So signs are not as effective as an actual barrier. So what we were advised to do, it was very problematic to actually remove the train. And it started this huge storm in the community about this beloved train. And the train's name is actually Porter. It's actually Porter the train. And people were writing into the newspapers about how awful this was, that their children couldn't play. And yes, we have the odd broken arm, but who hasn't? And we really loved playing on Porter the train. So our insurer told us that the best thing to do would be to actually barricade it. So I wish I had a picture of it for you all to see. It's encased now in fencing. So it looks awful, but it's supposed to deflect children's desires to crawl on the train. And I told you a little bit about my family last time we spoke, and this was going on, and I was really complaining about it. And it's just so stupid. Why? Would you rather your kid get hurt? And I was having this discussion, and my youngest son came in and said, "Mom, are you the one that has stopped children from playing on the train?" Yes, yes, I am. He just couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that not only had I done that, but it was part of my job to stop children from the joy of playing on the train. So that's a goofy story, but it's very true for what we have right now, because you're reopening parks, but you're not reopening play structures. It looks very, very unsightly, but yeah, use the yellow guard tape, tape it up so that it's very clear to people that the play structures are closed. And if you are posting signage, make sure it's simple, that it's got a phone number to call if there's an emergency, and really get the messaging across on your website. Maybe even as a custom at the beginning of council meetings, you can say, enjoy the parks. We remind families that the play structures are closed. We had a very bad accident actually in that same park with a gentleman who took his 3-year-old to play on the swings in February. I mean, you think it would be apparent that the swings are closed in February, but it wasn't apparent to him. He thought the play structures were still open, and his child had a very bad bone break as a result of that. So you do have to get the messaging across as best you can. Actually, obstructing the structure so that kids can't get on it is the best, but anything short of that you can do with taping. The least recommended is signage, but if you are doing signage, keep it simple. Make sure there's a phone number for emergencies. Sorry, I went off on my tangent story there.
You're the one. My kids loved Porter the Train.
Don't tell all your kids.
I loved Porter the Train.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we've got a bunch of other issues to try to get through, and the next point is budgetary issues. And this is a really valid issue for council to be thinking about. I mean, the reality of the financial situation right now is that both the federal and provincial governments have spent a ton of money and continue to do so on assisting people to get through this crisis. What that's going to mean is that the funding for municipalities is 100% guaranteed going to be affected. I don't know how yet, but I promise you it is going to be affected. And so when you're budgeting, when you're working on your budget, that needs to be thought about and discussed. But budgetary issues and financial issues are also very relevant in your reopening plan. And so if you don't have the money in your budget to pay for people to reopen all of the bathrooms, as an example, that's a perfect reason why you would decide to open them in stages or in smaller numbers. Reopening, I suppose, does not have to mean complete reopening. And it's completely within council's discretion to decide what facilities to reopen, when and how, and looking at your budgetary finances when making that decision is appropriate. Anybody want to pipe in on budget, Nuala?
I think these are extremely uncertain times. I think we have seen a great deal of generosity from the federal and provincial governments, and I expect that will continue. There is going to be a cost outlay for this, no question. And there is going to be a cost associated with reopening in terms of what you can do to meet those marks. So there definitely will be a costing from that. And there'll also be, I think, in terms of budget, it doesn't have to all be a gray sky. We were saying earlier before our session began today, we're all learning how to work differently. We're all learning about this teleworking, and I'm in no position to say anything today, having had my Zoom camera fail twice. But generally speaking, it's working, and I think one of the messages that I think should get to council when they're looking at budget is, not through our own desire, but through the way things went. We were thrust into this crisis, and we responded with a number of things, including, and let's look at teleworking. Can you save money on that? Can you save office space on that? Can you save a terminal space? Is that a better way to go? Are you going to have more buy-in from people who say, if I can telework, well, that changes everything, because that relieves my childcare responsibilities or my elder care responsibilities or whatever. So I think it's important that we have a sober recollection of what we did during this time and what worked and what was more cost effective, because there is going to be money required to get, just start the engine again, frankly. But also, I think we can also maybe work smarter. And that's another topic, I think, where I'm going to have more comments as the days unfold. but certainly start the discussion. If you're saying nothing except, gee, we really need to look at budget earlier this year because of what we've been through. And if that's all you're saying for the moment, fantastic. But start the discussions. And my experience with municipal treasurers are they are pretty forward looking. So I think your treasurer probably already has this cooking up in his or her brain. So I'd start those kind of discussions. If you have a finance committee, if you don't have a finance committee, now might be a good time to strike one. You do have a finance committee. I would really want to see kind of what their thoughts are. And this is another beautiful opportunity that we're really lucky in the North. Work with your neighbors. See what they're doing. See if there's opportunities to cost share. Paul and I are going to in a later session. We're going to talk about service sharing for various services of neighboring communities. So input from some municipalities have real crackers. Most of them have really smart, loyal people working for them, and we can all benefit from those kind of discussions.
Okay, so the clock has gone a lot faster today than it typically does. And we've got a whole bunch of other issues that we'll put to a panel discussion next week, but there's a couple that I don't want to miss. One is the speed of decisions, and I want to talk about that briefly with the idea of should we be first? I have always been in councils to slow down. And what I mean by that is not we should drag our feet just for sport, but a lot of times an issue comes up in a municipality and council are faced with ratepayers who have what to the ratepayer is an urgent issue. And councils get caught up in the urgency of the ratepayers without taking a breath and looking at the issue and getting advice. And I can tell you that we have one municipality that we act for occasionally. Their council meets every single week, and they often make a decision one week and then in the next council meeting at the following week unmake it. And that is not a role that a method of working that I'm recommending to council, because it hurts your credibility. So my point with slowing down is slow down enough that you can get proper advice, have a complete and thorough debate, and make the right decision for your municipality. That's the very best leadership that you can give as council, and particularly for heads of council who are here where you're leading meetings. Please try to keep that idea in mind. It shows really good leadership, and that's what your communities need right now. They need a head of council that's strong and running an effective meeting, a council that is leading from the policy perspective, not getting into the weeds and discussing about how many paper clips we bought, but actually looking at these big policy decisions that affect everybody's lives right now. So I'm urging councils to slow down. It may mean that you have to have more meetings, get advice from staff, have really good written reports that become part of your public record so that you can establish for your community why you've made these decisions and how you've made them, and that you made the right decision the first time because you took the time to get the right advice and the right information. And then the next question that goes along with that, and it goes back to a lot of the stuff we've been already talking about, is should we be first? Do you want your municipality to be the first one to reopen everything in the COVID era? And my initial thought is I really don't. I love being innovative, but I don't really see a good reason for any of the folks that I work with to be the very first to reopen and be the experimental guinea pigs. We can let Southern Ontario do that and see what happens. And does anybody have other comments on that issue? Nuala does. I can see her mouth moving.
Yeah, we are seeing municipalities, even I think Paris was one of them that opened and then they kind of had to pull back a little. So I think you'd rather be not first and not have that open and then close thing. You don't want to be it's very important, I think, to monitor your community and see the level of stir craziness that's going on, because that will bring its own. I know there's a concern about domestic violence, and there's a concern about road rage with people that have just been, got cabin fever really from being home so much. So you want to have good outlets, and even I have found it, I think I even said this in another seminar, but Canadian Mental Health is a fantastic agency, and it's worth a phone call, to see what they think about the value in having certain things open and other things not so much. But I would always say with municipalities, one of the great things about municipalities is nothing's new. There's always somebody that did it before you. You do not need to be the first. You probably don't want to be the very last. You probably don't want to be one where they're saying, gee, I wish they would open the arena, or wish they would, every other municipality has done it, but not our municipality. And that's going to lead to a lot of aggravation and more, cabin fever, I guess, with people. So you don't want to be the very last, but there's no benefit in being first. In fact, there might be a great detriment if you open and then have to shut again. That would be really not impossible, nothing that you can't untie, but it'd be better not to be there. So yeah, I agree with Paul. Southern Ontario, I mean, look at the West Coast, look at Vancouver, and you'll be able to see the trend, what's working and what isn't working. Stay on top of it, but there's I can't see value in being the first.
Thanks, Nuala. So in light of the time, I'm going to hand this off to Mia now to do her closing tip reminders, and would really like to hear back from people about whether they like this open panel discussion. We've got a bunch more topics. So when Brittany sends out the email after this with the link, if you could just let us know whether you thought this worked for you or not, we'll take that into consideration. So Mia, what are you going to remind us about today?
Thanks, Paul. I too really enjoyed Porter the Train. I just wanted to bring that up. I remember my parents taking me to Bellevue Park, and that was the first thing I wanted to do, was go on that train, and I made my way on there. So, Nuala, thank goodness you didn't do that quite a few years ago. So I will be quick, and I'm mindful of the time right now with respect to my helpful reminders, but we've kind of seen a shift in the last few weeks, how, before we were slowing everything down and kind of getting into working remotely, and now it's picking back up, and we're, thinking about reopening, getting back into the workplace and so on, whether it might happen, in a few weeks, maybe in the next month, but we know now that that's the direction we're heading in. So understandably, this is taking a toll on us in every single way that we can imagine. We worry about social isolation, and we just kind of want to get out there now, and we still have those fears of getting sick. We still have the threat to financial security that's swirling around, and then just worries about how it's going to go when everything does eventually open up, because that's not necessarily something that we can easily predict. So it's still very easy to get caught up in the panic, especially if we're reading a lot about the negativity. With reopening happening, it comes with a whole new host of fears and anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. So just always remember those safe places that you can go to, is keeping everybody safe and economic recovery. So there's a few things we should always keep on our mind. Our government has so far had a good handle on what's going on right now in our country, and our province, has not lost control when we compare ourselves to other areas, or other countries, when we look at New York and what's going on there. And so we have a pretty good handle up to this point of what's going on, and we've had some pretty good guidance. So on kind of a level, a local level, with municipalities, this has been achieved by us collectively. Everybody has worked together to, set aside the usual way of life and modify it to beat this pandemic. So there's lots of silver linings in here, and you realize the strength of your organization and how quickly everybody can come together. It's also presented an opportunity to review a lot of policies and procedures that are currently in place right now. And we've learned how to act in unison, on a global level, on a a country level and then on a municipal level as well. So there were lots of lessons that came from this, and there's still a lot of lessons that will come from this, and it's all positive. And we also know a lot more about our vulnerabilities and how we can manage those. So the different challenges and changes that we're faced with when this first began, such as moving to being remoteless and closing down and stopping services and so on, now we're making plans to start that up. So a lot of the same kind of worries and fears are going to come back, but now we know how to handle those in a different way because we've been through this a few months ago. So it's all very positive, and I think everybody's doing a great job, and I think it's definitely something to be proud of. So that's all I have for today, Paul. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mia, and the rest of the team, and thank you all for joining us today and participating in our poll. Thank you, Mayor Othmer, for your question. Hopefully we'll get some more from other people next week. I certainly appreciate that, and just thanks very much. Be safe this weekend, and we will see you next week. Take care.